Okay, hello. My name is Tessa Maffucci, and I'm coming here from Brooklyn, from Pratt Institute, and I'm going to be speaking a bit today about a question that has been fascinating me for a while, which is this question of what does place mean in our current world when we think about the world as now a digitized landscape. And this has been a couple-year project that I've been undertaking, still very much in its early stages, but thinking about the Garment Center in New York City as a case study of how we can understand place in fashion. So I could talk for hours and hours about the history of the Garment Center, so please find me after if that's interesting to you. But briefly, I just want to orient it a bit that the Garment Center and New York fashion globally in many ways is this duality between, on the one hand, what we see on the left, which is the consumption. So this is turn of the 20th century, Fifth Avenue, shopping as leisure. And on the right hand, garment workers on a May Day march up Fifth Avenue, protesting labor conditions and workers' rights. So all of this history kind of came to a head with an organization called the Fifth Avenue Association at the start of the 20th century. And essentially this was a group of landlords and retailers and owners of department stores who felt that fashion workers had become too entangled with these spaces of shopping and consumption. And they wanted to push them away, essentially, still keep them proximate enough to make the fashion, but not have them so visible to the shoppers themselves. And so on the right there is a group of garment workers on their lunch hour, and this was the type of so-called distasteful view of labor that these Fifth Avenue Association was concerned with. So what ended up happening was that fashion production in New York City was pushed away from the Fifth Avenue shopping district toward what is now the Garment Center. So this area of Midtown Manhattan, roughly 4 avenue blocks and about 10 street blocks from 9th Avenue to Broadway and from the 30s up to the 40s, where fashion production ended up being sort of sequestered away for the last 100 years. And there is incredible architectural significance to how the Garment Center evolved. Essentially, when production was moved to this alternate space, you started seeing buildings that were created, purpose-built for fashion production. So one example is this cooperative garment center building, which was actually a worker-owned cooperative where the floors were rented out to co-op members so they could do production in New York. Another example is the Bricken building, which shows this kind of very precise type of building that happened during this time, this wedding cake, it's called, this tiered building that allowed a lot of light in and allowed long working hours. And all of this created a landscape in the Garment Center in New York City that was really inherently a built environment for fashion making. But what's happened in the intervening years is that fashion production, the actual making, has declined immensely in New York City. So 95% of our workforce is gone, and this number is from 2017, and it's only continued to decline in the past couple years. And so what was the Garment Center has shrunk, and although there were projections put in place in the late 1980s to try to preserve this district as a historic heritage place of fashion making, it didn't really work so well because of a variety of global forces as well as just a lack of enforcement on the part of the city. So this is where the project sort of started to take form for me. I have a background in both fashion studies and digital humanities, and so I started looking at inventories of production across the city, lists of producers, different types of makers, specialists, and you notice a real clustering. The biggest sort of bubble there is the Garment Center. It's still the place where most fashion production and definitely most luxury fashion production takes place. And then that adjacency is Long Island City. And then you also see spaces in Brooklyn, Staten Island, up in the Bronx. So what was key to all of this is clustering. Always fashion production needs to be adjacent to other fashion producers and adjacent to the designers and to the academies and schools. So this significance of nearness is really, really crucial. And in addition to some of the data-driven work, I also undertook more qualitative studies and oral histories, visiting different producers in the garment center. This one, the woman in the center, she and her husband founded this company, and they largely employ an immigrant population of workers who come with incredible skills to give and lend to the fashion industry. This is it's a leatherworking studio. The owner, Ushir, on the right, he observed that there's a real agility to fashion production in these small clusters. And so you now have more men's goods or pet accessories being made in the garment center as opposed to women's goods. And then this is, on the upper left there, you'll see George and his father, two men who have been doing pleating in New York. They're the last pleaters in the garment center, basically the last pleaters in New York City, and they run this very specialized atelier. And the woman on the lower right is someone who joined them as an intern and then has now sort of become an apprentice and a junior pleater, a sort of rarity to have someone young come in and learn this very heritage-based trade. So all of these examples are kind of anchored in a movement that I see happening, which is my area of focus is made in America, made in New York. What is American fashion? So my observation is that across the country, there have been this upsurge of fashion training institutes that have come about. So Rightfully Sewn is in Kansas City, Blue Tin Production is in Chicago, Isaac is based out of Shinola in Detroit. And then Custom Collaborative, I have to have a disclaimer, I'm on their staff, I joined their team this year, but they're a nonprofit based in Harlem that uptrains women in fashion production work. So trying to bring back a sense of craft making, really. So all of this idea of investing in labor and in the individual and the human maker is in contrast to this type of technology like the Shimaseki machines, like Sobots, things that allow you to make garments sort of without the human element, but yet these are not what's being used for fashion production in any of these urban centers because it's still more expensive, it's still more awkward than human production. So all of this is my interest in this dialectic between local and global, and how do we make when design is somewhat scattered, but yet production is still something that has to be proximate and has to be clustered. And so the question that I find myself wondering about often is, kind of how do we reconnect ourselves to our process of making? How do we reconnect in this time? And just ending a few things that have kind of been percolating as I look to the next stage of this project. Thinking from Barth and mythologies, this idea of something being quintessentially of a place, and what does it mean to have something be made in Italy or made in New York or made in America? These are the questions that I want to continue to explore. And then this just really important observation from Celine Simon, who is a human rights activist centered in the fashion space, who really observes that our supply chains of fashion, this legacy of made in, is a very problematic one that comes loaded with a lot of concerns around exploitation, appropriation, really that the economies of fashion need to be reconsidered. So that's where I'm at now in this project is, in this question of heritage and, origin, what really should stay and what perhaps needs to be reconsidered, unpacked, and perhaps undone. Thank you.